The reason I say that is because I believe with all my heart that God already, as He always does, continues to work. God, the God of the past, the present, and the future. God's already out there. He's already kind of got things claimed and put together. And what we have to do sometimes is to catch up with God. But part of what I want to do today is to kind of give a little bit of help and instruction as we look forward to what the goals are for us as a church. And remembering what God's goals are. You remember I asked you last Sunday if you can tell me what God's goal was. What's the thing that we're to emulate in our life? Talks about, go make disciples. Talks about go out there in the world and where we find ourselves in this world today and find a way for us in order to begin to impact lives out there in the world. It's a replication to a great degree of what John Wesley, the founder of our United Methodist Faith, said when he said, "The world is my parish." That's what he says. Now that was a real shake-up because in John Wesley's day, he found that the Church of England found that the only place you could really preach was within the walls of the church itself. That was the only place it was proper to preach. And so when John Wesley came back with his little message of fire, they said to John Wesley, "Excuse me, John, but your message has a little bit of flame to it. I think you need to take it outside." John Wesley said, "Perfect. I have no problem with that." Here they were trying to punish John Wesley, and his reaction was, "I'll go." And he goes out and he starts in the highways, the byways. He starts making a difference in life because he said, "The world is my parish." And in fact, he was preaching outside of his father's church, his father Samuel's church. And finally, people got so irritated, they said, "You need to leave the property before we put a constraining order on you." Well, that's paraphrased, but you kind of get the idea. And so, John said, "No problem. If you want me to leave, I'll leave." So he goes right across the street to where the burial site is, where his father was buried, and he stands up on top of the tomb and he starts preaching there. And they said to him, "You can't be here." He said, "In England, when you're buried, you own the property. This is my father's property. I can stand here and I can preach." And he kept preaching and he never stopped. And he said that to his disciples too. He said, "Man, you got to be about the time to turn some things on here, make some differences happening in your life and in the world itself. Because you know what? God's going to take us on a venture to the unknown." That's what John Wesley said. And people said, "John, it'll never work." And you know what? It did work. That's why we're here today. Is because somebody was faithful enough to see a vision of what could happen, of what God was doing in a world that no one could imagine. And in a world that turned things completely upside down. One of the things that I love is when I grew up in a hardware store my grandfather had. And when you grow up in a hardware store, that's really a cool thing. My grandfather had such a hardware store, it was unbelievable. His hardware store was filled full of so many items. I was going to say junk, but I didn't want to say that. So many items that people from far and wide would come to the store. They always used to say in town, "If you can't find it anywhere else, go down to the hardware store, because I'm sure he's got it. But God help you trying to find it." Oh, my grandfather was one of those. Anybody come to want to sell him anything, he'd buy it. I remember one time he bought this whole thing. He bought a case and a half of, ready for this, egg weighers. Now, I'm telling you what, there's not a big rush for egg weighers, okay? But my grandfather was fascinated by that. They were amazing. I saw them as a kid. I kept thinking to myself, what in the world are these? He said, "Those are egg weighers." I said, "Why do you weigh an egg?" He goes, "I don't know. Maybe see how much it weighs." But he said, "I got egg weighers." When people would come to that hardware store, they'd drop off their wives uptown and let them do their thing. The guys would come down there, they'd sit on top of bale hay or baling twine, whatever they had to find a seat with. They put a little cardboard between them and the baling twine to make sure they have a soft seat to sit on, and they do that. Then I swear, what they kind of do is grab onto a rope and then venture back into the hardware store. The idea they got lost, somebody could at least pull them out. I mean, it was unbelievable. People would come and say, "I want to go from here to here. How can I do that?" You go back in the plumbing area and you'd find all kinds of stuff that you'd want. Of course, people would look at it, they'd find it, they'd take it apart, they'd put it back, not in the right shelf, but who cares? You're just going to search for it anyway. And that's what it went on. I was fascinated by this. And sometimes these guys would come in and buy these things like egg weighers. And I'm like, "Why are you buying this kind of stuff?" And they said, "That's our not yet." Now, if you're a farmer, I think you might be able to capture what I'm saying when I say that. They were looking for the things they would call the not yets. Do you know what not yets are? No idea? I'm going to tell you. Not yets are things that you buy, and when you buy them, you've got them. You may not need them yet, but you've got them because they're the "I don't need it not yet," But when I do need it, I'll be able to have it. Y'all with me? It's called the not yets. I love to go to the Iowa State Fair, and I love to see that section right over there by the Beef Palace, where what they do is over there, they have an amazing thing. They have those machineries and things that people create. Have you ever seen that? Those farmers are really good. And that doesn't mean you have to be a farmer to do it, but it's great. I mean, they take stuff and they actually create something out of it. They find a challenge, and rather than giving up on it, they go, I think I can find something in my not yet pile. That'll work great. I mean, you may not need it yet, but you've got it. And all of a sudden, when you find it, you begin to put it together. And before you know it, you can create something really good. I love it because what it is, it's kind of like an adaptive ability that we have. That when problems and challenges come our ways, we find ways in order to adapt to the situation and make it happen. There aren't too many people I know who are able to say, you know what, that's impossible, we'll never get that done. Why, you do that to a farmer, you know what they'd say? No problem. Just give me a roll of tape and, a couple of pieces of baling twine and, give me some number 9 wire. I can fix anything with that. And they go out and they create something with it. It's marvelous. It's amazing. And nobody ever knows about it sometimes until you look around and you think, what in the world was that supposed to be? But there was a reason and a purpose in everything that they put together. That's what it was like. And it was like that way because, you know what? You had to learn when you grow up there. When you grow up in Iowa, you got to learn how to adapt in situations and circumstances. Y'all with me there? I mean, if you don't adapt, you get run over sometime. Not literally, but you get run over. All of a sudden, the world goes behind you. And one of the marks of being an Iowa person is that, you know what? You can adapt to whatever comes to us. Look at the weather. Look at a farmer who plants seed without ever knowing if it's going to grow, what the weather's going to be like. You talk about people of faith. That's what that's all about. But we find ways as part of it in order to discover that venture with God into an unknown. That's the kind of same method we use. Saying, God, I have no idea where we're going. I have no idea what's going to happen. All I know is that I got my not yets. But I prepared all my faith and my promises in order to apply them for the circumstances and situations that I find myself in. I love history. And one of the things I love is a story about 2 guys by the name of Lewis and Clark. Have you ever heard of those guys? Huh? Now, let's be honest. Most of us, when we go through the history class, they talk about Lewis and Clark. Our first reaction is to go, why am I learning this kind of stuff? Thank you. Why would I learn about this kind of stuff? It means nothing to me. It has no purpose, right? But we learn it, we discover it. They were out there trying to find the Northwest. Yeah, you sat through the class. Thank you very much. You were awake. Very good. Trying to find the Northwest Passage, which was a route from where we were in the United States, where everything was getting put together, out there to the Pacific Ocean and find that river that they knew ran from all the way from the Mississippi and all that area, a river that ran all the way through. Of course, they had to go over near the Missouri to find it, but they had to get to that river, and all they did was have to follow it all the way through and get themselves out there going to the Pacific Ocean itself. Now, for 300 years, there had been talk in the United States, since it was founded, about this even before that, this finding of this river that would take them out to the Pacific Ocean itself. And the President of the United States decided that, you know what, we need to settle this once and all. I need to have it discovered and found. So he goes and he finds 2 people, Lewis and Clark. Meriwether, I think. Thank you very much. Lewis and Lewis Clark, yes. And so what they do is they go out and they bring together a group of people that they call you ready for this? The Discovery Corps. The Discovery Corps, it's called. And not corpse as in dead, but the Discovery Corps as in a group of people. And they gave them the plans. They said, what we want you to do is we want you to find that Northwest Passage. And so when Lewis and Clark said, who should we find? They said, find the people who are some of the best adventurers you know. But the number one thing is, ready for this? They have to be canoers. They have to know how to canoe because you're going to do a lot of canoeing. You're going to canoe all the way from the Missouri River all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. So Lewis and Clark did exactly what they said. Brought together this group of people, got them together and said, we're ready to take off. Gave them the message, put it together, got the best canoes they could find, build them big and long and tall. In fact, they built some other boats first. They had to switch over to canoes finally because they knew there'd have to be a problem with trying to navigate some of those areas. So what they did was they started down the path. And they knew, because they'd asked the question, what does the land look like that we are heading into? And they said, it is level, it is flat, and for the most part, it's treeless. You're going to find that's the kind of land you're going to have all the way from the Missouri to the Pacific Ocean. The best canoers, the best canoes, all set and ready to go to travel that particular part of the land. Now, I have a theory. I have a theory that the people who saw it and said that's what it looks like probably didn't get much farther than Nebraska. Have you ever been through Nebraska? Huh? Yeah, that's good that you haven't been to Nebraska yet, because Nebraska is a challenge. I used to live in Colorado, and I used to go back and forth to Colorado and from Iowa. And my wife said, how are you going to do that? I said, I'm going to get on the train. She said, why would you do that? I can get on Osceola, I go to bed, and I wake up the next morning in Denver. It's perfect for me. I don't have to endure the longness, the plains of Nebraska. Are you kidding? Have you been there? Okay, I see your head shaking. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, when you get there, you think to yourself, are you serious? What is this all about? And if you didn't know better and you got to the very end of Nebraska, you got into Colorado, what would it be? Pretty well flat there. Maybe a few little bumps, but that's about it. So there they were, traveling down the rivers, and they find themselves getting where they need to be. And all of a sudden, as they're coming up to that, you've been there before. You get out there near Colorado or whatever, you look up there, and all of a sudden you see these little bumps, and these little bumps suddenly get a little higher and a little higher. Before you know it, you come into what? Mountains. Now, can you imagine Lewis and Clark and all the guys with him? When they saw those things and said, what are those? And the people, according to the history book, said, those are mountains. And Lewis and Clark said, well, we heard about that, but the mountains that we have back east are like little hills. These are mountains. So as they got themselves closer to the mountains, all of a sudden the rivers ran, and they soon realized that those canoes they had were not going to go up into the mountains. And in fact, they go to Lewis and Clark and they said, how are we to canoe the mountains? That's like 101, right? What? How are we to canoe the mountains? They asked them. And Lewis and Clark said, I don't know. We never thought this would happen. We never thought it would look like this. That's not what we were ever told. This is altogether different than what we thought we would be experiencing and facing. So do you know what everybody did? They took a vote. You know what their vote was? Go back. So we can tell people it's not all flat and it's not treeless. But there are things called mountains. And if people ask us, did you go in the mountains? We'll say, no, we didn't, because we had canoes. And canoes are not made for going into the mountains itself. But Lewis and Clark kind of talked it up, found a few people, had a little spark in their heart, and said to them, we've got to change over. They find some Indians, and they say to them, do you know what it looks like on the other side? Yes. Can you help us with that? How are we going to get across these mountains? And the Indians were very plain. They said to them, what you got to do, first of all, is get rid of those canoes. And what you got to do is you got to get horses. Because you're going to need horses to get across the mountains. Now, the response of some of the guys with Lewis and Clark were, why don't we just carry the canoes over the mountains? And the Indians said, do you know what's on the other side of this mountain? What did they say? More mountains. And after that, more mountains. After that, more mountains. After that, more mountains. And we're not quite sure what's on the other side, but probably more mountains. And of course, they took another vote, and the guy said, you know what, we're going to go back home because we can't do this kind of thing at all. But Lewis and Clark said, let's hold fast to this. Let's see what we can do. And they were forced to change from being canoeists to being mountaineers. Do you hear that? Now, that's a major thing. It was for them. They said, we know nothing about mountains. We know nothing about climbing mountains. We know everything about canoes. Can't we just take the canoes with us? If you'll take the canoes, we'll never make it to the Northwest Passage. You need to jettison those canoes, and you need to look for something different to take with you. And the people, the Indians, said to them, what you need to do is you need to find yourself finding some horses and take with you. They were going off the map. Do you understand that? They had no idea where they were. And they were scared and they were afraid. But they made the trip. They used what was called an adaptive creativity. That's not yet. They use an adaptive creativity to say, we have no idea what we're going to find here, but you know what? I'm looking forward to that. For 30-some years, my father, my kids, we go to Canada every year, and we have a great time. We go just south of Hudson Bay, and we have a great time fishing up there. Now, for 30 years, we go to this place because 5 rivers come together and go under a bridge. And therefore, all we have to do is just stand real close to where we are, and we can fish right away. We don't have to go very far at all. Every once in a while, people would say to us, as the old Ojibwe Indians would say, there's a bigger lake over there, and you should go over there to fish. And we'd go, it's not nice for us to spoil our trip by going into an area that is proverbially off the map. And so we stayed there for 30 years fishing in that same little river, in that same little mouth of those rivers, and not going anywhere. I mean, it was unbelievable. So one day what we decided to do was, last year, we decided to take a trip to go there. Now, I have a son whose name is Eli, and Eli is a history professor out in Colorado. I said to him, why are you going to be a history professor? I can't believe that. He goes, Dad, that's all you ever watch on TV. That's all you ever talk about is history. And I said, okay, I understand that. Let's move on. So every time we go to Canada, what he does is he cannot wait to go there. He doesn't go to fish. He goes there to, ready for this, survive. You hear that? To survive. For the adventure. That's why he goes. I mean, we go up there. He's got all this adventure stuff he carries with him. You can't believe it. He'll load up the boat with all this stuff just in case, and he's ready to go. Lightning splashes out there, and all of a sudden we're on the water. He always stands up and goes, head to the island. And we'll go to an island. He'll hop out. He'll take out his hatchet and his little thing, and he'll start working on the sawing out. He'll make benches for us to sit on. He'll start a fire. He'll cover us up, even if it's not raining, with boughs of things. He'll put out the plastic thing. We'll just sit right there. I mean, he loves it. He can't wait to find it. He loves it. He's a MacGyver. That's an old movie. You probably wouldn't know that. But anyway, but he's there, and all of a sudden he loves that kind of thing. It's his world and what he does and how he functions. And I always love it because I can't believe his creativity that he comes up with. And you know what? We get to a place where he said, there's no way. He always goes, there's always a way. He preaches to me. He said, there's a way, Dad. Just watch this. So we went to the end of the lake. Now, we were off the map, had no idea where we were going. All we had was a compass. We get out there and we go up this little stream they told us to go to. And we get there, all of a sudden we're thinking, we're looking for this magic place where all the big fish are. Yeah, we'll see what happens. We come around the corner, and this is what we run into. Look at that thing. Now, when you have a big boat filled full of all kinds of stuff, the last thing you want to do is tackle one of those. Because I'm telling you what, boats don't go well up that area. And you don't survive too well if you go up in that area either. And so we were challenged to figure out how in the world are we going to get by and get up to this area. And so everybody said, well, let's just go back. There's no way we can get up there. Just go back. Eli, my son, Dad, let's go over there to the shore. I think I can figure a way. I said, Eli, it won't work because all these rocks. Next slide. Look at all those rocks. I said, there's no way we can get up over there. He said, Dad, we'll find a spot. Don't worry about it. Just stick with me. I said, okay. He branches the canoe. Next slide. All of a sudden, here's what he builds. He takes logs and lays them down on top of each other, and so that we can drag the canoes and drag the waves across the area to a portage to go to the other part of the river itself. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. And when we got there, it wasn't part of a river. It was part of this beautiful lake. And all of a sudden, I said, this must be the lake where all the big fish are and everything else. And so he casts out in the water, and look what he catches. You with me? That's this year. And I'm thinking, unbelievable. So, Dad casts out in the water, and look what he gets. That's 6 foot long. Northern pike. Isn't that unbelievable? Now, those of you who want to sign up for the fishing trip, I think this church should go next year. You understand? Men and women makes no difference. We're headed to Canada, and we can go to the same lake and make things happen. Now, watch this. My other son, who is a character, pulls this in. Now, I want to tell you, that's a 32-inch walleye. You with me? And he's catching all these kinds of fish. It's the most miraculous thing I'd ever seen at that particular point. And I thought to myself, man, we would have lost out on this whole thing had it not been for an adaptive capability for us to be able to say, rather than go back, to move forward and see where it is God's taking us. Now look on your sheets together today, because on those sheets I listed 4 things down. I should show you this. This is the picture of us heading back after we made that adventurous trip. See the excitement? Those are adventurers. You know? Yes, we did it. Oh, I tell you, I love it. Okay, now look at your sheet. There are 4 things that are listed there. These are the 4 things that the books say to us are the very things that are key for Lewis and Clark to be able to make their way through in this adventure. What's interesting is this list is also an overlay applicable to a biblical standard of what we in the church are called to do as we venture into areas that are off the map. Let's look at them. The number 1 it says is this, a reorientation. Jesus was all about reorienting. God said to Jesus, I'm sending you in the world not only to love people, but also to reorient this place. Why, there were so many rules when Jesus sent his disciples out, he got in trouble every time he did something. If he healed someone, got in trouble. It was on a Sunday, can't do that. If all of a sudden they find themselves doing something and before you know it, it was the very rabbis themselves and the priests and the scribes that came after Jesus to the point of even crucifying him and saying to him, you know what, it's not done that way. This isn't how we do it. There is order and this is how it has to be handled. And Jesus says, wait a minute, there's a higher order. God said, Jesus, you got to go there. And he said, what you got to do is you got to bring a new light. In fact, in the scripture we have something called the Old Testament and the New Testament. And Jesus says, you know what, I got to get these guys from the old religious faith into a new world. Because it's critically important that they begin to understand that as Jesus and as God talks about, we've got to reorient how we look at things. The Samaritan woman by the well. Don't ever talk to her. You know what? Not good. You want living water? Taste it and watch what will happen. When Jesus finds himself over and over again, he brings that message of Jesus, of God, which says to us, there are times in our life when we got to cast off sometimes the old tradition in order to catch up with the freshness of where God is. God never said to the disciples, okay, you've gone far enough in the faith, you just relax now. Take a little rest. Don't worry about it. You know, how do we call it? Sitting saved and sanctified? Or how about this? You are so heavenly bound, you are no earthly good. You ever hear that one? Where we suddenly come to the place where we say, you know what, I've got it all together. I'm so perfected, I don't even work on this anymore. No spiritual growth needed here. I'm just going to relax and cruise my way forward and in. God said, you know what? John Wesley says, you know what? He said, you stop moving forward, you start slipping back. He said, that's not what God does. God says to you, it's okay, I'll be with you. I'll forgive you, we'll move forward. I'll show you how to grow the next level because there's more that I put within you, more promise and more hope, more method for discovery, more meant to make a change in the world. Jesus said, man, you got to do something with those folks that were scribes and Pharisees of the Jewish faith. They have perverted it to such a point that it's not even my faith anymore. I mean, I got to send people in the world in order to do it. And you know what? They may even end up crucifying Jesus because they just can't reorient themselves to a new direction that God is going. The second thing is this. For the folks of Lewis and Clark, the world ahead of you is nothing like the world behind you. That's what Jesus was trying to say. The world that's in front of you is going to be nothing like the world behind you. And getting old, we love the way it is. Keep things and don't rattle the boat. Keep us where we are. Jesus was never about that. He'd say, I'll shake the boat myself in order to get you guys moving. I'll put you into life situations where all of a sudden you got to practice your faith. You got to put faith in God into practice in order to see what can happen. I'll do that for you because you know what? The new world we're moving into looks nothing like the old. And the persons who were the Jewish faith and tradition said, it's tradition. Fiddler on the Roof, how do we keep our balance? That I can answer in one word. Remember? Tradition. God said, I don't know where you got that at because there's a whole bunch. I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever. But you know what? I'm a God who is unfolding my creation. Thy kingdom come stuff. That's what we pray. God's kingdom that becomes real through us, through how we do, with what the church does. Thy kingdom come. That's what it's about. But he said, I want to tell you, the world out there is nothing like the world that you've left. Have you ever noticed that the world is changing? Have you looked at the newspaper lately? And we're sitting there going, I just don't want to do that. I'm going to drop out on the world. Are you kidding me? Jesus said, look at all the issues out there. That should make you salivate and hungry. The book of James says if you have problems and difficulties coming into your life, problems, difficulties, even a reorientation for the world itself, we're to grab onto it, hold onto it, because that's where we practice our faith. That's where we sharpen our iron. That's where we practice and get ready to move out into the world and to make that difference that has to be made in the world itself. That's what it's about. And he says, you and I have to find ourselves in that place and in that position to move forward. That's what Jesus says to us. And that's what our call is all about. Number 3, in an uncharted territory, adaptation is everything. We have to learn how to adapt for that. We got to learn how to do things in a little bit different way sometimes. And sometimes it's God who gives us that direction. And sometimes we have to catch up with God. It's that adaptability which is critically important for us. That's what makes the faith real. You know, when they looked at the Good Samaritan and they said, well, who would be the person who showed the good things? Well, it wouldn't be the Good Samaritan. It would probably be the Pharisee or the scribes who walked by him. He said, no, it was a Samaritan. How can that be? That's because everything's been turned upside down. God said, I'll work with anybody who wants to work with me. And by doing that, we can adapt this world and change that. Everything can do that way. Number 4 is this. Everybody will be changed, especially the leaders. Especially the leaders. You know, one of the prizes for us as disciples and as Christians is our ability to do things in a different way. The disciples, they kept dragging Jesus back over and over again. They just couldn't let it happen. But Jesus said, you know what? You got to understand, there's a new way here. And you got to put it into practice. And only when you do that will there be a difference in the world in which we find ourselves living. Jesus raises up the disciples and he sends them out. He says, I'm going to send you out into the world. What I want you to do is make a difference in the world. They come back to Jesus and they say, Jesus, you won't believe what happened. We raised the dead. Why? We healed people. Why? We cast out demons. People began to change their lives. Look at what we were able to do, Jesus. And Jesus was like a good coach saying, yes, this is the way it's supposed to be. Absolutely. How? Because of God. Yes, because of God, they said. God is great. God is able to do all things. And Jesus says, adaptable ability. All right, so we've got 5,000 folks here that need to be fed. What are we going to do? Let's hear it. And you remember what they said? Send them out. We don't have any food. Sometimes I almost get tears in my eyes thinking about this, but do you know what Jesus says back to the disciples? Then you feed them. You kidding me? You raised the dead. That's not an easy thing to do. You were changing lives. You did miraculous things. And now all of a sudden I ask you how we're going to feed 5,000 people. And what do you say to me? Send them away? Are you kidding? What should you have said? Send them away. We have no food. And you know what Jesus says in all sadness? He says this. Then you feed them. Feed them out of your closed, empty-mindedness, your lack of being able to adapt. Your forgetfulness of who I am and what I can do. You feed them out of that and see how things go. Can you imagine? But he doesn't stop there. Jesus always says, object lesson, watch this. Loaves and fishes, people get fed 5,000, basketfuls left over. People can't figure out how in the world those things happen and how it all came about. But he said, look, that's what I'm able to do. Jesus says that, you know what? He says, I can change those situations, circumstances. I can make it happen. God, how do we meet our wildly impossible goal of filling every seat in this church? And Jesus says, what do you think we ought to do about that? Well, you know, we just overbuild, I guess. Jesus said, no. He said, you know what? He said, we can do this. What you got to do is reorient your way of thinking, because sometimes we've been lacking for so long. We think that's normal. Friends, it's not normal. In the churches of the Iowa Annual Conference, we have empty pews. There are churches that are closing. Why? Because we just can't reorient. Because we've lived in it so long, we just think that's normal. That's not normal. God says, don't be satisfied with that. That's what I love about the Mingo Church. We got a vision. We don't want this to be the way it is. We're not ready to quit. Then get ready. Because Jesus is going to say, we got to reorient our thoughts and we got to hold on to the promises. We got to move in a different way. He said that's what's going to be critically important. We got to readapt ourselves. We got to look at circumstances and situations and we got to do something with them in a new way. It's like coming up with a crazy idea of doing a block party. And then all of a sudden all these people show up. And you think, how in the world, what is this all about? Jesus said, that's just a taste of what I can do. But I got to get it ready. There's people who are ready, but I've got to get it ready so when they come, they're able to feast and feed, and their needs will be met, and we'll have opportunity for people to be in ministry and a mission, and we'll reorient the whole thing. He said, because this is what goes on. The past is going to look nothing like the future. He says to me, because what's going to happen? It's going to be a change, and the change is going to start with who? Us. Why? Because the church is not a building, the church is the people. And he said, you really want to know who's going to change? Jesus did this with the disciples. The disciples had to change. He said, I want my leaders to change. Because the leaders are what's going to be out there professing it and making it all happen. And you leaders, be prepared because, man, it's going to change. I have good news for you. You're all leaders. You're all leaders. Jesus said, I need every one of you. You're not here by accident, but for a reason and a purpose, and put it together. To where an excitement comes into your heart and into your life. Did any of you go to Redbird Mission? That Redbird thing? Huh? Any of you? Have you ever gone to a mission project somewhere? You know? We had a board meeting here the other night. And in the middle of the board meeting, all of a sudden, one of our dear sisters stood up and left. And everybody's like, wonder why she's leaving. She goes, I got to go over to the other church because we're talking about the Redbird Mission. And I thought, oh, man. If you've ever been to the mission field or anywhere else, it changes you, doesn't it? It changes you. And you come back and you do that. You even get up out of a board meeting in order to go for the rest of the meeting because in 2 years you're going to go. Are you serious? Those people are hungry. We all are hungry. You don't have to go to the mission field to do it. You can be in your local. You know what it's like. You understand. You go back somewhere in your history in your life where all of a sudden you felt it. You've been there on that mission field. You know what it's like when all of a sudden you've seen that power happen. You've seen what God can do in the midst of all of that. You understand it. You'll even go down to the baseball field and clean up the trash afterward for 3 nights straight so you can get some more money in order to go to the mission field. Do you understand that? That's not normal. But to God, it all makes sense. I've taken people and I've taken churches to Haiti. And those people come back and they say, you know what? Whoa. I thought what I had was real. Whoa. Oh. God says, this is a mission field. The same thing's going to happen here. But you got to get yourself ready. And not by what we do, but by what God can do in us and through us. And we can change the world. God's already given you an example of that when you saw that wonderful block party out there. That was God. He was making it happen and making it care. I have a dog, a German short-hair pointer, and I love my dog. You know about German short-hair pointers? They are the word activity. I call my dog Jack. I took her to the vet, and the vet said, what a great little pup you have here. Oh, she's really beautiful. Look at that. He's really great. I said, well, I may not use you as my vet because it may have the name Jack, but it's a girl. Oh, yes, says. I thought, great. I'm going to get that right. Jack loves to do things. I mean, his world is looking for birds and anything else. That's his world. He gets up in the morning. That's his job. Find birds, anything he can do, find birds, point at them, and stay in a point for sometimes 30 minutes or more. He just loves it. That's his world. So he had surgery. She had surgery, and a little confused myself. She had surgery, and the doctor said, don't let her move for 2 weeks. You know, a little less activity. Are you kidding me? It didn't work. I called the doctor. What do I do? And the doctor says, it's time for us to bring your dog back. I brought the dog back. I said, we had to fit your dog with, ready for this, the cone of shame. You know what the cone of shame is? Well, my dog was like, I'll endure this if I can just look for birds. So we did the whole thing. When my dog was laying there, and I mean, she'd been through surgery, everything else, she was just laying there. I have this red ball, got a bunch of them in our house. She loves to chase this ball. Every time I hold this ball up, she changes. So she's laying there with these eyes, kind of looking up at me. I know where her heart is. And I suddenly think, man, I feel so sorry for you. So I take out that red ball. And I go. Her eyes light up. She shakes just to see that ball. And I throw it, and she takes off, stitches and all, cone and all. She follows it, finds it. She finally gets in her mouth. She brings it back and everything else. And then she kind of sits there going, and then she'll relax. And then I go. You see, the folks that went to Redbird Mission, that's what that's like. Want to go to the Redbird Mission? Yes! I want to go back where I can get, you know what I mean? Jesus said that's what it's supposed to be like. That when we hear the mission of what God has for us and the opportunities God has for us, and God holds up that red ball for us and holds up that adventure, that unknown with the promises surrounding it, and all of a sudden we go, oh, I like that. I want to get started now. I have good news for you. God's already held the ball up. And we're starting down that road. So what I want you to do is to have an opportunity for be able to say to ourselves, no matter where God leads us, wherever that may be, God, work with me in such a way that I become that same kind of hunger, and look for places and ways that that can happen. I went to go see a couple last week, 205 Davenport Road. And Rodney and I went. Of course, it was so dark that night by the time the board meeting got done, we had to use the headlights to try to find where the house was. And I was walking up the street in the middle of the night. I'm sure people were looking at me, and I thought, I don't want to go visit these folks, whatever. And I walked up the door, and the little girl was there, and she looked through the door, and she goes, hey, again. And all of a sudden, opens the door up, I go in, and I met that young man who's dealing with cancer, and his wife, and their 3 kids. I walked in, they had a little plaque on the wall. You know what it said? God says, I have plans for you, not to harm you. I have a future for you. And I said to them, I love that. And they go, that's our verse. I go, it's my verse too. It's what we read together in our scripture together today. God says, I have plans for you, not to harm you, but to give you a future. Do you not see it? It's all around you. Let's pray. God, begin to do your work in us and continue your work in us. Continue your work in us in such a way, oh God, that we can go through a change and a transition in our life and in our living. Go through it, oh God, that we might be able to be open to where you are leading. Prepare us, remold us, and shape us into what you need us to be, so that we can put on the mantle and take on the identity of Jesus Christ. God, we are ready. And you are faithful to work with us. Begin that work now. Help us to find new ways of creative ways to looking at things. And send those who you are working with to us, so that together we may grow, and together we may be understanding what it means to truly be the church. For all this we pray in your holy name, and all the people said, Amen. As the ushers come forward, let us receive our morning offering.